So what do you see in terms of how this dynamic is either impacting the workplace, if it is at all? And if it is, what are some things we can do in the workplace to smooth out or address some of these tensions?
It turns out that people in the workplace are also people. And so we bring in everything that we have into our workplace situations. And so one thing to know is that our stress around political conflict as a country, our stress has been increasing over the years, and especially in recent history. The other thing that we know is that employers are actually losing workers' time and attention to politics.
I'm so excited for our conversation today. My conversation with Tania Israel is going to be all about how do we navigate those tensions when we've got someone in our family, someone in our neighborhood, someone at work that we don't agree with politically. How do we cross those political divides? And how do we make sure those things don't get in the way of us having a productive and healthy conversation? So she's going to talk today about her new book, Beyond Your Bubble, How to Connect Across the Political Divide. And she's got some great tips. I took away 2 pages of notes. So I really encourage you to not only listen to how we screw this up, but some of the things we can be doing so we can help others feel heard and understood. So listen close and stay tuned. I'll wrap up the show in just a minute.
The Workplace Therapist Show is sponsored by the Leadership Foundry. Bringing a cutting-edge, real-world approach to leadership development, the Leadership Foundry partners with each client organization to create a custom-tailored experience, virtual or in person, that combines innovative leadership content, world-class facilitators, and one-on-one coaching to ensure your leaders have everything they need to grow and thrive. To find out more and to design your one-of-a-kind program, visit myleadershipfoundry.com.
Tania, I am so thrilled to be having this conversation with you. I think there's probably no more relevant time than right now than to talk about how we navigate some of these kind of political divides, political bubbles, political tension, whether we're talking about navigating that with our family members, our neighbors, or more relevant to this show, our workplace colleagues. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm just thrilled to have you here. So a couple things before we jump into our topic. I want to make sure everyone knows how awesome you are. So I'm going to read a little bio because I think it's really important to our conversation today. So you're a professor in the Department of Counseling, Clinical, and School Psychology at the University of California, Santa Barbara. So someone right after my own kindred spirit. You hold a PhD in counseling psychology and is a fellow in the American Psychological Association. Dr. Israel teaches about helping skills, leadership, and community collaboration, among other things. She has facilitated educational programs and difficult dialogues about a range of topics, including abortion, law enforcement, religion, and sexual orientation. And then your book, which we're going to talk about here today, Beyond Your Bubble, How to Connect Across the Political Divide, Skills and Strategies for Conversations That Work. Fantastic. I am so thrilled you're here to join us. So maybe a good starting place, you didn't pick some soft topics to jump into, Tania. Like everything you jump into is tense situations. So tell me I'm just curious, how did you get into this kind of work?
Sure. Well, we have to go back a couple of decades. Back in the 90s, I had started a group to bring together pro-choice and pro-life people to have dialogue with each other, because I had been engaged in this kind of work, and I was tired of being angry. I didn't feel like it was helpful, and I thought I'd like to try a different approach. So brought together folks, and it was an absolutely transformational experience for me. It did not change anything about how I felt about women's reproductive rights. It changed so much about how I felt about people who disagree with me on the topic. And what I realized then was that if I was evaluating other people's conclusions based on my framework of my experiences and values, that's the wrong metric. But once I was able to hear not just where they were, but how they got there, then it made so much more sense. And not only did it make sense, but I was really able to humanize them. And that was so important. So having had that experience, as other kinds of opportunities have come up, and I've been doing research on sexual orientation for over 20 years now, that's put me into a lot of conversations with people who might have different views. And the skills that I have learned from psychology, the research that I know from psychology, has really guided me in terms of being able to have effective and productive conversations. So when the 2016 election happened, and it was really clear that in this country, we were having trouble connecting across the divide.
I noticed how you said it. I love how you see that past tense. And continues to be a trouble for us connecting across the divide. Yes, please. Continue.
Indeed. And I think that 2016 was kind of a wake-up call to a lot of us, who recognize, oh, okay, this is a real problem. And I thought maybe I have something that can help. So that's how I got. I started by creating something that I call the flow chart that will resolve all political conflict in our country, because I'm optimistic like that. And spoiler alert, it has not actually yet resolved all political conflict in our country, but I think it's just a distribution issue, really. And so then I created a workshop to help people develop skills to have dialogue, and then that led me into writing the book.
So I really love what you said about what got you into this, and this realizing of humanizing the other side, right? Getting to understand their perspective, their story, how maybe they came to those beliefs. Mm-hmm. And while that's more easily done on a one-on-one basis, it's hard to scale. So that's why I kind of love what we're going to talk about today, is how do you kind of scale that? Because I could sit down and talk to everybody and spend 3 hours learning their life story. But a lot of people either don't want to do that or don't have the time to do that. So how do we kind of still get those nuggets and learn ways to humanize better and faster? So, all right. So maybe that's a good segue. I'm going to start by helping you set the stage here. What have you seen, even in the last year, or you can go back further if you like, what have you seen as kind of some of the problematic areas and tensions, the bubbles, when we talk about kind of political discord and political silos? Tell me what you see from your world.
So I always ask people, what is it that brings you to being interested in dialogue or to wanting to have dialogue? And so in the workshops, I would ask this, and when I talk to people about these things, and people say very often, there's someone in my life who I want to stay connected to, but we're having trouble because we have these political differences. That's one of the big reasons. There are also people who say, I simply cannot fathom how people can think or act or vote as they do. And so it's just like, I can't understand them, I want to understand. And of course, some people want to persuade others to see things as they do. People are looking for common ground or bridging the divide or finding ways of healing the divide. And so those are really the primary reasons that people say, this is what brings me to dialogue. And then I say, okay, well, what's getting in the way of that? And there are a lot of things that, because it's like, okay, great, we all have these motivations, so why aren't we actually doing it? And a number of the reasons that we're not doing it have to do with our perceptions of those people who we might be having dialogue with. And so the idea that those other people are uninformed, they are extreme, they are angry, and they are not open to dialogue. And so those are some of the things that I hear people say. And so the first thing that I try to start with is correcting some of our misperceptions of people across the divide, and there's decades of psychological research that talk about ways that we misperceive other people who disagree with us. And all of that plays out politically also. So we tend to think that people are more extreme than they are. We see this happening so much. In the media, the representations of people are representations of people who are more extreme. Apparently, that makes better news than interviewing people who say, I don't know, I can see it both ways. So it's what we're seeing.
I've never seen that news interview. I would love to see it. I've never seen it in the last 12 months. Yeah, I kind of agree with both sides. I've never heard
that's accurate. Most people are not at the extremes. But those are the people who are in the media, and it's also on social media. Those are the people who are engaging more in social media. So we see social media posts and we think, oh my gosh, everybody on the other side is, is storming the Capitol or, lighting the police station on fire in Portland, that this is what we think is happening. And that's not most people. So what I try to do is I try to speak to what can we do for most people? Most of us are not elected officials. Most of us are not people at the extreme. How can we then engage most people in these conversations?
Yeah, I love the way you said that. I think that's so important. And I think that's so interesting too that, we tend to set it up, this perception of others, the they. I like that, the they. And I don't know why we do that, but the they is always like uninformed, uneducated, bad person, whatever it happens to be. It's never like positive things. And then, of course, the media showing the extremes only further push that. So, and then I love this nice framing of most people. So tell us a little bit more about how you go about doing that. How do you get people to kind of open their eyes to this idea of most people? And what are some ways that we can start to see maybe our coworkers, for example, differently when we know they might hold, or we think they might hold a different political view than us?
Yeah. So I'll start out by saying, these are some of the misperceptions that we might have. And so you can correct for those misperceptions in part by having dialogue, by actually having a conversation with another person that's about understanding them. And by conversation, I don't mean commenting on their social media posts, that these conversations need to take place face to face, not Facebook to Facebook. Like that's not actually a way of promoting understanding. And when I talk about dialogue, I'm talking about a conversation that promotes understanding and connection, because those are the things that people are looking for. And really, for all of those motivations that people have, understanding and connection are the things that will help them to reach their goals. Even if you're trying to persuade, you're never going to be able to do that if you don't understand and you're not able to connect with the other person. So really focusing on understanding and connection. And if we're doing that, then that is going to help us to really get an accurate understanding of who that other person is and where they're coming from, rather than relying on those really kind of stereotypes that we're getting from media and social media. Yeah.
So I think you're moving in a direction. I'm completely tracking you. First, there's the perceptions we have in our head, and then ultimately we need to take some action and actually have some conversations. Mm-hmm. And I like kind of what, in your book, you talk about kind of Kevin and Celine, and you kind of talk about kind of that dynamic between those two that really want to reshape their relationship and kind of and can reconnect or find a way to connect. So you talked about understanding and connection. I have a big sigh here because I'm wondering, how do you start with that? What's the starting place? What's the first question you ask? I don't know. I would know the answer to that.
I think we need to start with an invitation, especially if it's somebody who's already in our lives, and especially if there's been a rupture there. And so acknowledging that maybe things have been bumpy when those conversations have happened in the past, but saying, I'd like to really approach this in a different way. I really want to understand more about where you're coming from. And then you have to really want to understand. You've got to come in with a stance of curiosity. And even more so, the other person doesn't need to, but if you're trying to understand, then you've really got to want to understand. And some people tell me, well, I don't really want to understand. And I'm like, that's fine. Dialogue is not for you. Move along. You can do other things. But this isn't going to be your jam. But if you really do want to achieve any of those goals, then trying to understand and inviting somebody in, and then however you want to start with that, wherever you want to start. You might say, well, I know that we've talked about, this, I know we've talked about the environment in the past, or I know we've talked about guns in the past, and I'd like to understand more about where you're coming from. And then you just shut up and listen. You actually have to then be quiet and try to listen for understanding rather than listening to respond. So often when somebody's speaking, what we're doing in our heads is trying to figure out what we're going to say back at them, to either share our perspective or to argue against their perspective or to point out this logical inconsistency and have a gotcha moment. Mm-hmm. None of those are going to be very helpful for understanding and connection. So what I always recommend is you listen to really try to understand, and then when it's your opportunity to speak, rather than saying what you think, you summarize what they just said. So you say what they think. Say, oh, you think this, or you just, repeat it back. Oh, this is where you're coming from. And that will both make sure that you're really understanding them, but it will also help them to feel understood. And that's so important in dialogue, is for the other person to feel like you actually care what they have to say and you understand where they're coming from.
I think you did a masterful job of taking some of the skills of a counselor and clinician and applying it in a real world way. I think that's beautiful.
Thank you.
I think that's beautiful. I think that's so beautiful, because I think you're right. It's so easy to get the results we want if we have that discipline. Now, I also know some people are going to be really tempted to jump in and say, oh, I really want to, or either I really want to prove my point, or I want to really ask them, why do they understand that? I had a mentor of mine years ago, trained therapist, and he said, why is not a clean word. Why has implied judgment. Mm-hmm. Like, why are you wearing that today? It's like, whoa, I didn't know you didn't like that. So is there any tips you have for us for people that are really wanting to try and jump in, other than just hold their tongue?
So the first thing I'll say, and you know this because you have training as a therapist, mm-hmm. Right? So it takes practice. And so what I suggest is that people, the book that I wrote is all about skills that will help us to do this. And so we can just jump into a hard conversation, and some of us are ready to do that, but some of us aren't, And so if you're feeling like, okay, this is a new skill for me, I don't know how I'm going to do with this, try it in a very low stakes situation first. Try it somewhere where it's something that it doesn't really matter. Like it doesn't activate you in terms of hearing what somebody says. So maybe somebody's talking about like what restaurant they want to go to, and you say, oh, you like that they have tiramisu on the menu, or oh, you've really enjoyed the interaction with the servers there. That's the same kind of thing. They say something, you just summarize back what they've said. And getting in the habit of doing that can be so valuable, not only for dialogue across political lines, but it turns out everybody likes to be heard. And so we can do this in any of our relationships, in any of our conversations, and it helps to strengthen that muscle for ourselves, and it's also probably going to help to improve our connections with people.
I love it. That's beautiful. So I want to pivot a little bit and talk about the workplace. So tell me, what do you see in terms of how this dynamic is either impacting the workplace, if it is at all? And if it is, what are some things we can do in the workplace to smooth out or address some of these tensions?
It turns out that people in the workplace are also people. And so we bring in everything that we have into our workplace situations. And so one thing to know is that our stress around political conflict as a country, our stress has been increasing over the years, and especially in recent history. The other thing that we know is that employers are actually losing workers' time and attention to politics. So this isn't just a personal issue. We bring this into the workplace. We bring our level of stress into the workplace. We bring our attention to things in the workplace, and we bring our tension about things into the workplace. So, if somebody in the workplace is wearing a button that says Black Lives Matter or Make America Great Again, people are going to be reacting to that. So that there are ways that we display our views, more outwardly in that way. But even if people don't do that, there are ways that, we talk about our values and our experiences. And actually, sometimes it's really great when we do that and it's not specifically about politics because it can help us to connect. But then when it does get into political realms, then we can find, then there are the places where there can be more of a rift in the workplace. So certainly I would say, even something like, you see somebody's bumper sticker on their car in the parking lot, or somebody says something that they've done over the weekend, they went to a protest over the weekend. Those things, really signal kind of where people are politically, and we can have reactions to those things, even if it's not necessarily related to a conversation we've had with that person.
It's funny. I don't know. I think about kind of my experiences growing up in the workplace and been in this for multiple decades at this point. And early on, there was always this mantra: well, you don't talk about money at work, you don't talk about politics at work, you don't talk about religion at work, and you probably shouldn't talk about sex at work. Okay, but those are kind of things that are kind of no, right? Now I'm hearing more and more people saying, no, I want to be able to talk about politics at work. I want to bring my whole, and they'll say, I want to bring my whole self to work. And you and I can honor that, but we also know that creates some complexity. So as you look into your crystal ball, okay, and you look into the modern workplace, do you see us opening up more conversations at work, more things like talking about our sexuality or talking about our politics? Irony is, no one's really talking about the religious beliefs right now. It mostly seems to be politics and other things. But those kinds of things. Do you see more of those conversations coming? And if so, how can we prepare for that?
So I'm hearing from leaders, from managers in the workplace that they're struggling with sort of, what do we do about this? Because because employees are wanting to not only bring their whole selves into the workplace, but want the workplace to take a stand on things sometimes. And so what do we do about that? How do we navigate that? And what if there's differences of opinion in terms of these things? So I think it can be really valuable to have these conversations. And the things that we think about are political. I mean, politics and the ways that we view things politically are very much based in our values and our experiences. And we can talk about our values and experiences. It doesn't necessarily have to be about candidates. It doesn't necessarily have to be about partisan things, not even, sometimes not even about policy. But knowing where people are coming from and recognizing that there is diversity of view and diversity of experience. And the workplace is sometimes where we have those opportunities to connect with people who have different kinds of views, who have different kinds of experiences. I think that can really enrich not only a workplace, that can enrich our society, where we're able to do that in ways that help us to understand and connect. Not necessarily where we do that in ways that, that put some people as in group and some people as out group, or that create more conflict or people not wanting to work with each other. So if we're going to do this, we need to do it skillfully.
Yeah, beautifully said. Beautifully said. Well, that has a whole lot of implications, because that means people need to have training and be equipped to be able to do this well, because we are dealing with some more sensitive stuff, particularly when you're talking about people's experiences. Those sometimes can be quite large Pandora boxes when we open them up. But I do want to, I like that you said kind of the path really forward, if we continue down this, is going to be talking about experiences and values, because those are kind of more true to who we are, right? And they're not really, it's not like a bipartisan, it's just my experience and my values. But that takes time. So now I'm channeling the manager that might be listening right now, and she or he saying, Tania, I don't have a lot of time in my workday. How much time do I need to spend sitting down with the direct report and say, tell me kind of your life story, or tell me about your background or experiences, or how do I unpack that? So are there any practical ways that a manager might be able to, or he might be able to start that conversation?
So some of these conversations aren't necessarily taking place in structured ways. People have lots of different conversations in the workplace, the water cooler conversations, So what does the water cooler conversation look like? And can we use those as an opportunity to connect a little bit more with people? So someone says, oh, this weekend I went I went on this trip to go see this historic site. And you say, oh, tell me a little bit about what's the meaning behind that for you, like what's what drew you to want to do that. So finding ways of sort of getting more deeply into the meaning that things have for people. And somebody like right now, there's so much opportunity to talk about what this country means to us and what we value about it. And we can do that in ways that aren't necessarily partisan. Someone could say, oh, I went to a national park over the summer. And you say, oh, that's so interesting. I know one of the things I love about our country is that we do have this national park system. I'm curious about what's that like for you? So as we're talking about things, they can be connected to sort of our views and our values about politics, but they're not specifically political conversations necessarily. And the more we have that foundation, the less a specific political conflict is going to create a rupture.
I like your kind of guidance on basically, what I wrote down was looking for those moments to be curious.
Absolutely.
And just looking for those moments, look and just be curious and be open and just ask some questions about, tell me about the meaning behind that. And I also like, you did it very subtly, but it was important. You took a positive spin on all this. You didn't say, well, tell me why you hate this country. You didn't say that. You said, tell me about positive things about what is it about this country that means something positive to you, or why did you like doing that? So you took a positive angle to it, which again generates a little more positive emotions, which hopefully sends us down some positive connecting conversations. Right. Tania, this has been great. So I want to, again, do another beautiful shout out to your book, Beyond Your Bubble. So is there anything, I want folks to purchase the book, so I definitely don't want to spoil it. It's beautifully written. Is there anything in here that we haven't talked about today that we should have? Is there anything else you'd want to add for our conversation?
So the only other thing that we didn't talk about so much is there's a chapter on managing emotions. And this is definitely one of the things that I see come up for people and even sort of prevent them from entering into dialogue is concern about their own emotional response to what's going on and concerns about other people's emotional responses and what that's going to be like. And so the thing I'll say is that we have ways that we can actually work with that we can work with our emotions so that we can stay in those conversations when we want to. And that's not to say that we always need to keep a lid on our emotions. So sometimes you need to vent and you need to get support. You might want to go then to someone who might already agree with you and is going to be most likely to support you. You're not necessarily going to want to do that in a conversation with somebody where you're trying to connect across the divide. So some of it's being intentional about how you do things, but also knowing what are some of those tools that are going to help us to regain our equilibrium when we want to.
So looking at those tools, which are in the book, but then also finding ways to, if we are feeling a stronger emotional reaction, those safe spaces where we can vent, where we feel heard and appreciated, we can kind of let the tea kettle steam come out, right?
Yes.
Immediately thinking I need to thank my children and my wife for listening to me all these years, because that tends to be my safe space to bring back everything I get frustrated about during the day, and they listen very patiently. Yes. I might add.
Sounds like you've got good skills in your family.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, I think so. Well, thank you for coming on the show. So I ask all my guests this question. What's one life hack you might have for us, tip or trick, on how we can have either better conversations and build better relationships, either at work or at home? Any kind of thoughts around that?
I would say the thing I already said, which is about when somebody speaks, rather than sharing your own perspective back, summarizing what they just said. I think that's one of the most useful things that we can do in conversation.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful. I mean, it's a nice thing that, I do now naturally because of my training, but it's so powerful because you're right to the point that you said. People feel heard and understood. and then immediately you're starting to build a bridge, which is what you're ultimately trying to do. Well, this has been amazing. So if people want to buy a copy of your book, follow you, learn more about the great work you're doing, where can they go?
So you can go to TaniaIsrael.com. I'm also on social media as BYB.
So Tania, TANIA.
TANIAISRAEL.com. And on social media, BYB Dialogue, Beyond Your Bubble Dialogue. And I had mentioned that I was doing workshops that sort of led to the book. I'm actually now doing workshops. I've retooled them to be able to offer them in a virtual environment. And so people are, bring me on board to do those in the workplace and for organizations. And so just want to make sure that people know I'm available to do that. I think that having these skills and building these skills is going to help people in the workplace as well as in all these other areas of their lives, in their families, in their communities, as a parent, as a partner. So I'm hoping that this can be a moment where people are motivated to learn some of these skills that are just going to be useful to them in their lives.
So glad you're doing that kind of work. I encourage everyone listening to reach out to you, and so you can help facilitate some of those conversations. So not only does it promote healing, but also allows people to kind of work better together without things in the way. So thank you. Thank you for the work you've been doing. Thank you for the work you continue to do. And thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Brandon.
Wasn't that a really, really rich conversation? After we were done with the conversation, Isaac and Ingrid and Emily said that show could have gone on 54 minutes. It was a lot of stuff. I took lots of notes. So here's some things I took away. I hope you heard the same thing. So here's some of the ways we screw this up. We have perceptions of others. We put them in the kind of the they bucket. We say they're not educated, they're different than us, they're not open to dialogue, they're bad, right? Media reinforces that. They're only showing extremes. Tania didn't say it. I'm going to say it again. I've said it before on other shows. Stop watching the news. Stop watching the news. Regardless of what you're watching, whether it's CNN or Fox News, they're going to show extremes. It's there to get you scared, and it's there to polarize the situation. And then she said, really important point. I think a really important point that we're not seeing on Fox News or CNN. And shame on them. Most people are not extreme. Most people say, you know what? I've got some beliefs on both sides of the spectrum. I can kind of see points on both sides. And yet we walk around the world thinking everybody is one of these extremes. So that's the ways we screw all this up. And then how do we kind of fix this? She said, have a real conversation. Try and understand and connect with the other person. And she said, the way you start this is you just start with an invitation. I want to understand. And she said, just ask them a question and then shut up and don't respond. She said that was the main number one point. Do not respond. And the very end, simple but so powerful, she said, just summarize and restate what you heard. That makes that other person feel heard and understood. And now we're building a bridge. And then also, one more important point around all this, she also said, this is going to be important in the workplace as workplaces continue to evolve, and there's the expectation that we bring our whole selves to work, and we can talk about everything from our political views to our sexual orientation to anything else that might be very personal. And we need to look for those moments to try and get curious and find those small points where we can learn about others' experiences and values. So as you can see, lots to take away there. I think the big takeaway for me is just make sure I'm listening and I'm stating back what I heard so others feel heard and understood. So hope you enjoyed the show as much as I did, and I look forward to our next show.
This week, we'd like to thank JLACYGNE for their 5-star review of the Workplace Therapist Show. The review says, "The Workplace Therapist is always time well spent. Relevant and witty, Brandon offers positive and pragmatic suggestions and solutions to life at work. His approach allows for easy application of common workplace dynamics in a way that produce growth and efficiency and satisfaction." Thank you so much for taking the time to write a review. It really means a lot. It helps us grow our tribe and moves us up in the Apple Podcasts so that other people can find us. And that's what we're trying to do here, to share it. So if you want to be featured on the Workplace Therapist Show, don't forget to follow the Workplace Therapist across social media, as well as like, comment, and rate this podcast. We would love to share your review. And don't forget to check out theworkplacetherapist.com for more awesome content. Thanks so much.